Many of those with an interest in history will be familiar with the ancient Roman Republic, an instrumental chapter in the history of the city of Rome itself, as well as the greater Mediterranean and Europe. Even after the fall of the Roman Republic in the late 1st century BCE, many of its doctrines survived well into the imperial period and even served to influence the scape of politics to this very day. Ancient Rome continued being admired for its influence and splendor centuries after the deposition of the final Western Roman Emperor Romulus Augustus in 476 AD, and even after the fall of the Eastern Roman Empire nearly a millennium later. However, for most of the Middle Ages, the Eternal City was under control of the Papal State, centered around the Pope himself and the Catholic Church. Established in 754 AD and existing for more than 1,000 years until its dissolution in 1870, the authority of the Papal State, even around the city of Rome itself, was not at all times free of resistance. Most of the Papal State's documented wars or conflicts revolve around external matters outside of its borders, but within Rome itself, we come to find a very interesting outlier in its history. A major revolt sprung up in the 12th century AD in Rome, the heart of the Papal State, leading to the establishment of an entirely independent city-state within Rome, which went as far as to even kick the Pope out of the city. This city-state came to be known as the Commune of Rome, and while it wasn't destined for permanent control of Rome, it still held on for half a century, which for common citizens could still to some degree amount to an entire lifetime back then. Just before, I mentioned the ancient Roman Republic, and not without reason, because this 12th century medieval city-state has more relations to ancient Rome than just the location and the name, because the entire premise of the Commune of Rome was to draw on the political principles and philosophies of the ancient Roman Republic, using its governmental structure and ideas as a fundament for the functioning of this new breakaway city-state. But first, we must delve into the background behind its establishment. So, how did the ideas and ambitions behind the revolt and the establishment of the Commune of Rome actually come into fruition? The most important individuals behind the scheme, as well as its first leaders, were two men: Arnold of Brescia, a political leader and priest, and Giordano Paleone, member of a wealthy family in Rome at the time. These two were united in their adamant opposition of the power of the papacy and their perceived view of its corruption and exploitative wealth. Arnold of Brescia hailed from the north of Italy, and as his title implies, was from Brescia in the region of Lombardy. Arnold formed part of the resistance against the rule of the Count Bishop of Brescia and the subsequent papal influence over the city. He led a revolt against the Count Bishop in 1137, with Arnold's proposal being for the church and the clergy to diminish their dominion over the city and renounce their claim on Brescia. In the aftermath, Arnold was expelled from Italy in 1139 and would go on to spend the next 4 years of his life abroad, first in France, where he was again expelled for conspiring with a heretic, and later in Zurich, until finally returning to Italy in 1143, leading to his rule in the new Roman city-state. On the other hand, Giordano was not without status either, as he was a member of the Paleone clan, founded by and named after his father, Pier Leone, in the late 11th century. The Paleone family was amongst the most influential banking families in Rome in the 12th century, and they partially funded the restoration of the city after it had been sacked by the Normans in 1084. The family was of Jewish origin, traced to Pier Leone's father, Leo di Benedicto, a Jew who converted to Catholicism and was even baptized by Pope Leo IX. Giordano was not without siblings, as he had 9 of them, but one of them happened to be his brother, Pietro Pier Leone, better known as Antipope Anacletus II, from 1130 until his death in 1138, additionally making these two detrimental to the political situation developing in Rome at the time. The year 1130, when Anacletus' rule as antipope began, thanks to the Roman civil population backing him in majority, would mark a tumultuous period which would plunge the papal state into utter chaos. After becoming anti-pope, Anacletus, who now held full control over Rome, managed to force the otherwise legitimately appointed Pope Innocent II to flee to France, thus banishing him from the realm. Innocent II greatly condemned Anacletus, and in the following years, Italy was invaded twice by the Holy Roman Empire, first in 1132 and later in 1136 at the behest of Pope Innocent II and his newfound ally Lothair III, the Holy Roman Emperor himself. In the midst of the conflict, Anacletus II, the antipope, died on the 25th of January 1138, with the next antipope almost immediately submitting to Innocent II, who regained control of Rome until his death in 1143. After such an unstable decade of rivalry between Anacletus and Innocent, defining the political landscape and the groundwork for the following events, we now find ourselves in the 1140s, where the mantle of papal resistance would be passed on to Anacletus' aforementioned brother, Giordano, alongside Arnold of Brescia, which is where they and their establishment of the Commune of Rome finally come into the picture. 1143, the year in which Pope Innocent II died, would mark the birth of the Commune of Rome, the aspiring medieval successor of ancient Rome, so to speak. It all begins with Giordano Pierleoni leading a revolt against the papal temporal power in Rome and its supporters from the landed aristocracy. Giordano, much like his younger brother the decade prior, wielded the support of the Roman civil population as a result of their shared disdain for the policies of the papal aristocracy, and together they managed to seize control of the entire city by September 1143. With the city now under dominion of the Roman populace and Giordano, they established a senate akin to that of the ancient Roman Republic more than 1,200 years prior, defeating papal authority in Rome and indirectly causing the aforementioned death of Innocent II. This new senate, the governing body of the commune, would consist of 56 senators, and these were appointed from each of Rome's districts, of which there were between 12 and 14 in the Middle Ages, a similar amount to those originally divided by the Roman Emperor Augustus. The head of the Senate, referred to in this context as the first patrician, was Giordano himself. In March of the following year, 1144, a new pope, Lucius II, was to be appointed. He did by no means conciliate with the new Roman city-state, as he attempted to regain control of Rome by, according to some sources, storming the capital with an army loyal to him and demanding that the new communal senate would renounce and return the city to the papacy. However, the city had already by 1144, leading into 1145, established defensive measures to counteract potential threats from the papal militia. This would result in the death of Lucius II, who died from his injuries during his assault in February of 1145, just 11 months after his consecration. This served to prove that the Commune of Rome was here to stay, at least for a while. Naturally, the cardinals then needed to elect yet another pope, that being the fourth pope in the span of only 2 years. This new pope, Eugene III, was appointed in February of 1145, after his predecessor, Lucius II, had met his demise to the Roman Commune. Eugene could only be allowed consecration and temporary entrance in Rome on the condition that he would recognize the Roman communal senate as a legitimate entity, but he initially refused. Naturally, this decision meant that he was instead consecrated elsewhere, specifically in the Farfa Abbey to the northeast of Rome. Afterwards, the Pope took up residence in the city of Viterbo, being effectively banished from Rome. However, a couple of intermittent mutual agreements between the Commune and the papacy, wherein both parties agreed to recognize one another as legitimate, did ensue in the same decade. First, in December of 1145, which was short-lived and instantly led to civil unrest from the Romans, once again forcing Pope Eugene III to leave Rome and return to Viterbo in January of the following year, 1146. During the following years, the Pope would have been abroad due to matters relating to the Second Crusade, but in 1149, an agreement that would last longer did take place. The Roman Commune and the Papal State would come to a mutual agreement of recognition, and the Roman population would still view the Pope as a figure of religious authority, in spite of their resentment of the papacy's interests. And in the same year, Eugene moved to the town of Tusculum, in closer proximity to Rome. The tensions, however, did not subside, and nor would the Roman Commune back down, meaning the Pope was still unable to safely reside in or even enter Rome without fueling unrest. The legacy of the ancient SPQR echoed throughout Rome, with the city even seeing the ancient Capitoline Hill and its ruins becoming a center for senatorial council assemblies, being a frequently visited site for political matters, which presented a stark contrast to the Capitoline Hill's prior centuries of desertion and abandonment by the Roman population. In general, everything seemingly looked promising for the Commune of Rome, and its senatorial establishment had thus far been a success, seeing within short time the abolition of the city's urban prefect as it would have functioned during papal rule, the destruction of clerical structures, the removal of any legislative powers bestowed strictly upon the Pope, and reputedly the renovation of the Milvian Bridge, which was originally built under the ancient Roman Republic. However, the decisive year of 1145 also witnessed the deposition of Giordano Pierleoni, who subsequently seems to disappear completely from the historical record, possibly either dying or living in exile. Furthermore, the reason for this deposition is unknown, but it could be due to him belonging to the Pierleoni family, who were in effect all banished from Rome, alongside many other wealthy and aristocratic families for their affiliation with the papacy, even though Giordano himself was an exception to this tradition, having after all been pivotal in the commune's existence. Regardless, Arnold of Brescia remained amidst this short power vacuum and would become one of Rome's most respected individuals, with his purest ideology resulting in him serving as a form of moral leader and orator for the Senate of Rome, and later on a counselor of civic matters. He would frequently arrange gatherings on the Capitoline Hill in front of both the Senate and ordinary Romans alike, wherein he would speak of the papacy in a rather harsh manner, very much reflecting the stance of the Romans on the matter. Recalling the mixed reputation of the Pope throughout Italy and his earlier rebellion back in Brescia, he would openly declare the papacy as being nothing but robbers and thieves, and the Pope's leadership as being a tyrannical, corrupt body rather than that of an esteemed successor of the apostles. Simply put, Arnold's actions were so significant that they would eventually lead to him being excommunicated by the Pope. Overall, with an ambitious new city-state with its very own governing body within Rome itself, there was no doubt that it would be met with varying responses from the other city-states within Italy, since their self-governance did not mean the same as that of Rome's newfound sovereignty. And, being positioned at the crossroads between other regional powers, especially the Kingdom of Sicily, which was an ally of the Pope, the Roman Senate sought out an alliance with the Holy Roman Empire with the aim of military and diplomatic backing. In an attempt to achieve this, the Roman Senate would repeatedly write letters to Conrad III, ruler of the constituent Italian kingdom within the Holy Roman Empire, but seemingly to no avail, as they did not receive an answer from the king. Being met with no response from Conrad III, the Roman Senate would instead send a group of envoys to the king's court. As they stood before him, they would deliver a groveling speech that would not only express solidarity and an unconditional desire for his allegiance, but also the ambition of crowning him as the Emperor of Rome, with the aim being to restore the Roman Empire in its ancient form through the legitimacy of Conrad III. Our unanimous endeavor is that we may again restore the empire of the Romans, which God has entrusted to your guidance, to the might that it possessed under Constantine and Justinian, who, empowered by the Roman Senate and people, governed the world. The Senate's desire for an alliance with Imperial Italy was primarily due to the Papal State being a close ally of the infamous King of Sicily,
Roger II. He was a fierce adversary of the Holy Roman Empire, and the Roman Senate had thus anticipated that this would mean an alliance with them would therefore be in the interests of Conrad III, the Kingdom of Italy, and the wider empire. But nothing ever came of their requests, and thus no direct alliance was established between the Commune of Rome and the Holy Roman Empire, nor its Italian constituency. In the 1150s, Rome faced significant opposition and potential threats to the Senate's existence. In 1153, the Treaty of Constance was signed between Frederick I, also known as Frederick Barbarossa, who would soon become the Holy Roman Emperor, and Pope Eugene III. The treaty's main provision stated that the Holy Roman Empire would support the Papal State in preventing the Byzantine Empire from regaining a foothold within Italy. However, more importantly, it would also aid the Pope in opposing the Roman Commune and restoring papal and aristocratic control over the city. The same year, 1153, would also be the final year of Pope Eugene III, and unlike his predecessor, he would die of old age instead of being killed by the Romans. Anastasius IV succeeded him, being consecrated at the age of 80. Anastasius recognized the Roman Senate and had no intentions of overthrowing it, which marked a short truce between the Pope and the Senate. Anastasius would live peacefully within the walls of Rome, but his pontificate lasted only a year as he would die in December of 1154. Following this brief pontificate, yet another pope was eventually elected and consecrated by 1154, one who differed greatly and was determined to oppose and overthrow the Roman communal Senate and fully reclaim authority in Rome within the hands of the papacy and the exiled aristocracy. The pope in question was none other than the infamous one and only pope of English descent, Hadrian IV. He would immediately seek harsh confrontations with the Roman Senate, immediately negating any possibility of peaceful resolutions between the two entities. The Roman Commune would in turn refuse to recognize Hadrian. The Treaty of Constance, as mentioned earlier, had by now come in effect, something the Pope would leverage to his advantage. As a result of the stabbing of a cardinal in Rome, Pope Hadrian IV placed an interdict on the city, forbidding the Romans collectively from participating in religious ceremonies and activities. This was amongst the most severe sentences that the Pope could impose, and in addition, he had demanded that the Senate would expel and depose Arnold of Brescia. Frederick Barbarossa, who was at the time leading a campaign in Italy against the Kingdom of Sicily, was en route to the city of Rome for his coronation as Holy Roman Emperor. Arnold was caught by Frederick and would subsequently be executed, with his remains being cast into the Tiber River in Rome by June of 1155. In the days following Arnold's execution, Frederick Barbarossa, who now found himself in Rome for his coronation, was met on the St. Angelo Bridge by some 1,000 outraged Romans. This would result in a battle between the imperial army and the Roman rebellion. In spite of their efforts, the Romans would eventually succumb to the numerical superiority of the imperial army, many of them eventually cast into the Tiber River, or fleeing upon realization of their inevitable casualties. Several incidents would weaken the relations between the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor, however, as the papal legates responsible for delivering a letter from Pope Hadrian to Frederick interpreted the Pope's message in a way that Frederick viewed as assertive and derogatory. The letter would imply that the emperor's coronation was bestowed upon him as a gift by the Pope, conveying an exaggerated narrative of the papacy's importance. In addition, the Pope had come to an agreement with the Kingdom of Sicily, granting it territories that Frederick viewed as imperial claims. Eventually, this would compel Frederick to embark on a second Italian campaign, further stirring up the troubles of Italy. For Rome, this would mean that Pope Hadrian IV's potential iron grip on the city had lessened, as he was forced to spend the remainder of his pontificate attempting to bring about negotiations in an increasingly conflict-ridden Italy. In 1159, during his final year as Pope, Hadrian's relations with both the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa and the King of Sicily, William I, had greatly deteriorated. The following papal election was a contested one, with a legitimately appointed candidate, Alexander III, against anti-Pope Victor IV, who had the support of Frederick Barbarossa. Although Pope Alexander III eventually prevailed, he spent most of his pontificate outside of Rome due to the increasing influence of Frederick Barbarossa, who held the title of King of the constituent Italian kingdom, in addition to being the Holy Roman Emperor. As we now find ourselves in the 1160s, we come to witness a wave of important events directly affecting Rome and proving to be detrimental to the Commune's future. The Senate now had something in common with the Pope and numerous other Italian cities at this point, in that their relations with the Holy Roman Emperor was at a turning point. Frederick Barbarossa was furthering his iron grip over Italy, vying for control over its cities. To achieve this, he would leverage other influential people in the empire at his disposal, such as Reinald of Dassel, the Archbishop of Cologne, and Christian I, the Archbishop of Mainz, two closely allied imperial prelates. They would utilize their influence towards supporting papal candidates backed by the emperor, additionally furthering the interests of the German Catholic clergy and weakening the Pope. One of their primary objectives was to work towards the gradual German clerical and imperial subjugation of the Italian cities. Both of them would be embarking on a campaign into Italy in order to attack and survey cities that were in opposition to the Holy Roman Empire. Rome would also fall victim to this scheme, as the aforementioned Archbishop Christian I would travel to the surrounding region of Latium and repeatedly harass the city of Rome, eventually forcing them to both recognize and accommodate Paschal III, an anti-pope backed by Frederick Barbarossa. In the midst of this, there was in proximity one city whose count conspired with the Holy Roman Empire, that city being Tusculum, whose relations with Rome were mutually quite hostile. Trouble between the two was brewing, and in spite of repeated attempts of diplomatic resolution from envoys sent by Reinald and Christian, the Roman Commune would launch an attack against Tusculum in 1167. The Romans would delegate a force numbering somewhere in the low 5 digits, between 10,000 and 40,000. Nevertheless, it was still the largest army that Rome itself had assembled for centuries since the dawn of the Middle Ages. Upon being made aware of this, a smaller army regiment of the Holy Roman Empire was assembled by both Christian and Reinald to defend Tusculum. This battle would take place on a field just outside the walls of the city and was to be known as the Battle of Monteporzio. The imperial unit numbered only in the low 4 digits, meaning it was outnumbered at least 10-1 by the Romans. The Roman men were in comparison poorly armed and lacked the military campaign experience and discipline of that of the imperial army. This meant that the Holy Roman Empire would emerge victorious. The gates to the city of Rome now stood open for the Holy Roman Empire. However, upon marching towards the city, the imperial army was struck by plague and was then forced to cancel the expedition. This, against all odds, secured the independence of Rome. At this point, it was no longer the papacy that was to be the main enemy of Rome, and although tensions did continue, their relationship would undergo changes in the coming decades. Towards the 1180s, after several new popes, it was Pope Clement III who finally came to terms with the city and marked the end of the feud. One final battle would be fought by the Roman Commune, again at Tusculum, against the Holy Roman Empire in 1191, resulting in the total destruction of Tusculum. Afterwards, this particular tale of an independent medieval Rome about draws to a close in 1193. After having been reduced to merely a single senator, Rome would once again gradually fall under papal dominion after half a century of independence and continued conflict. In spite of it being sovereign no more, its legacy would still alter the political landscape of the city of Rome for centuries to come. Its government would, in essence, continue to exist, meaning the government of the city was no longer in the hands of the absolute nobility in the way that it had been under prior papal administration. Annually elected consuls would from this point onward govern the city. However, inevitably, they would also prove susceptible to schemes and corruption. This means that the unrest in the city had by no means come to an end, as would be proven by seizures of power in Rome during the following centuries. Thank you for watching this video. and by all means, leave your thoughts and feedback in the comment section below. For more similar and obscure historical content, consider subscribing to the channel